I want to give you the data to help grow your business because this is your baby. And like CRO has a tendency to prove people wrong, and people don't like being proven wrong.
Of course. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but you have to approach it as like, no, no, no. I'm doing this to make you look good. I'm trying to help you.
My name is Roma Santiago and I'm the founder of Experimentation. On today's episode, we have Shiva Manjunath. Shiva is the host of From A to B, a great CRO podcast that you definitely should check out. Shiva shares insights into how to manage stakeholders, getting more strategic with your optimization program, and what he likes to eat for breakfast. We hope you enjoy the episode.
So, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Very happy to have Shiva Manjunath here. You are the host of the podcast From A to B. And by the way, I love the title because for people who there's kind of a trick it's playing on us, I think, because for people who are not familiar with the concept of A/B testing, it might sound like the path from A to B is very short because it's not from A to Z. But for the people who are familiar with the concept, they know there's this giant pool of knowledge that goes into it. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I actually had to when I was looking up the names for that. There's a couple other like therapy podcasts that had this name,
Okay.
right? Like improve yourself and whatever. And I'm just like, "F it, I'm just gonna make this my podcast name. And if I get copyright claimed, I'll know I've made it.
I mean, it's yeah. You'll know you'll made it, but
Yeah,
optimize yourself and optimize your website at the same time.
exactly.
Speaking of optimizing, I know that you are an experimenter by vocation and by choice. So you optimize everything from web pages to your morning coffee and your breakfast.
I'd say the choice is more in my inability to not handle or deal with my ADHD. So, yes, I am an optimizer by choice of choosing to optimize rather than not, but it's like a personality
Right.
thing. Like, I'm sure you feel the same way. It's inherent in us to just look at things and be like, I want it to be better.
I agree.
How do I make it better? Let's make it better. I feel like that's inherent to all optimizers'
Yes,
personalities.
yes, and experimenters. So the first question I have, and this also ties into therapy, kind of. I mean, the whole concept of optimizing, getting better, improving yourself, and web pages. But I'm really interested in knowing what does the optimized breakfast look like for you?
It's not good, but it's a routine that I could just keep on a daily basis. So, every morning I have a protein bar, and then I have my pre-workout, go to the gym, which is basically the same one or two drinks that I have that has a bunch of caffeine and creatine. Come home, usually a bagel with something on it, and then protein powder from Huel, which is like a meal replacement. And then I've been doing a lot of meal prepping so I could basically have the same meal every day and watch and count my calories. So it's not fun,
But it works in terms of
but it works for me.
yeah, in terms of nutrients.
But it does allow me to like when I go out with friends or I'm like I could spoil myself when I go out and like break the routine. It makes going out feel a little extra special.
Mm,
0 out of 10 wouldn't recommend it, but it makes my life easier.
yeah, that if it makes sense for you, I mean, it's fine. But um, before we get into the groove, I just want to give a short introduction. I mean, to introduce myself a little bit. For those who don't know, I'm Ana Kerkovic and I come from Serbia. I've been working in CRO for 3 years, but I have experience in digital space and digital marketing for almost a decade. And that makes me feel kind of old, but on the other side, on the other hand, that's a experience right under my belt, which is great. Um, One of my biggest interests in this field and in general is psychology, like behavioral psychology and consumer psychology. And I just love how those principles can be translated into web space. So I think you kind of also mentioned something like this, that this is also your interest that drove you to this field. Is that right?
Yeah, psychology is one of the more fun things for me. People are weird. People are unique, and trying to learn exactly how they tick, what they like, what they don't like is just interesting to me. If I wasn't a CRO person, I'd probably want to go into some form of psychology because it's just people are interesting and weird creatures. Um, the glass half full is I like to manipulate people through websites,
Would you
and we'll
say
just leave it at
it's
that.
manipulating, or would you say it's motivating or persuading?
Yeah, yeah, motivation, 100%. Yeah, I help people do the things that they want to do, and it's not. I definitely don't use black hat tactics to
Of
convince
course.
people to do
No,
things.
it's
Not
basically
I.
helping them do the things that they want to do, but helping them do those things faster and more
Yes, it's a joke, by the way, for people who don't know me. I'm not actually a sociopath.
two optimizers walk into a bar. But let's get into it, and I'm really interested in hearing your expertise on this. I want to know more about how you strategize and how you kind of moved away from spaghetti testing in terms of not just testing idea after an idea, but rather having a more structured approach, uh,
Mhm.
methodology, whether you have a prioritization method or you don't. So tell me more about that.
So that's probably its own topic worth like many classes. But to summarize how I approach experimentation, moving away from spaghetti testing into like more strategic testing, spaghetti testing is fine when you start. I had been doing spaghetti testing, getting my program spun up because it's just a way to move through the process, try out some things. If it's the first thing you're doing, I joined my job 7 months ago, 8 months ago, and we just got our testing tool set up like 3 or 4 months ago. So if that's your mechanism to just try some shit, see what happens, if you're new to experimentation and you're just trying to see what takes to move through the process, spaghetti testing has a place in basic testing, and that's fine. It's like water wings have their place in trying to learn how to swim, but Michael Phelps wouldn't be using water wings competitively. It will slow him down. He's a lot better than that. He will graduate beyond that. So I know that I've probably gone away from this hard stances of like these are the only ways to do testing. If spaghetti testing is your way to move into more strategic testing, because you are literally in a meta way trying out, you're experimenting with experimentation. That's fine. You're trying to figure it out. We have all failed at experimentation. We've run tests that we thought we QA'd well, up, and then we're like, oh, here we can fix our QA process. We'll iterate on that process. We'll figure it out. That's just inherent to what we do. That's okay. But if at some point when you're running through your testing, all you're doing is spaghetti testing for like years, you probably have hit a local maxima. You're probably spinning your tires in mud, and there are better ways to do it. So, a lot of what I think about with this experimentation, kind of getting away from spaghetti, or I guess graduating, if we use the water wing
I love the
example,
term. Yeah.
graduating, yeah, my examples go to go totally crazy. Most of them suck, but I'll give that one. That was a good one. I appreciate that one. Good job, Shiva. But the the water wing example, at some point you graduate towards better testing. And how to graduate into more strategic testing for me, at its core, is just keeping research at the focal point of what you do. Spaghetti testing is cool idea, let's try it. Cool idea, let's try it. Cool idea, let's try it. But when you run through research and you start identifying actual user problems, I created a pretty fun, pretty impactful, what I think. Man, I'm really boasting myself up here. All the cool things that I've done. I promise I
Keep
don't have this
going.
much of an
No,
ego,
keep going.
but Romeo definitely shot this out. But when we talk about problem focused hypotheses, that to me is one way of up leveling away from spaghetti testing into strategic testing, because at its core, you're solving problems that users face. And in order to identify those user problems, you have to conduct research. So, spaghetti testing a lot of times is solution focused. It's cool thing, cool thing, cool thing, try, 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 try. But most of the time, it's not backed in research. And if it is backed in research, you're not ranking it against other ideas that might be backed in more research or stronger forms of research. So it's a long winded way of saying basically to graduate from spaghetti into more strategic testing, I think using problems as a mechanism through research is the way to graduate.
Right.
This is Romo Santiago from Experimentation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch. Now back to the episode.
Now let's say that you have a pipeline and you did do your research, you went through your heuristic analysis, you looked at data, maybe you did some user surveys and whatnot, so you have an idea of what might be wrong with the website, and you have some sort of prioritization, and you want to test a couple of hypotheses, and then of course you have some tests in the pipeline. But let's say a couple of your tests finish running, so how do you incorporate these insights into the test ideas that are waiting to be tested? Do you just how do you do that? What's the next step
Yeah.
once you finish your first round of testing and you have some sort of knowledge?
Yeah. So I had Bob on my podcast to discuss bio frameworks, and that was a pretty fun conversation. That's a very not subtle plug towards my podcast from A to B. You could find it wherever you find podcasts. But basically, but basically, the crux of that conversation is that prioritization frameworks are very good guiding principles, but they might not be as robust, and following them to a T, especially if you're in a nascent program or you're involved with people who don't care about experimentation and you don't have a true like culture of being data driven or experimentation, it can be hard. So if you're the guy screaming, prioritize everything, you might be shouting into the wind and hear like no one listens to you. Versus if you're saying, hey, let's do our best to try and test as much as we possibly can and validate as much as we can. That's a more reasonable take that more people will be inclined to do. And that's where you start to get people involved in experimentation. So,
It's like you said a couple of times, approach the stakeholders, management, your coworkers with the I want to help attitude.
totally. Yeah. I I I agree with the smart things that I said because yeah, I think that's just playing the politics game in CRO. In order to get buy-in, if you're just a dude yelling at everyone saying, "Why are we testing it?" blah blah blah. Apparently I'm Mickey Mouse. Why are we doing those things? People aren't going to like that. They're going to be annoyed that this one person just keeps on bugging them. If you're in a culture where like top down, it's instilled that everyone follows that same, of course we want to test it, it's different. But when you are like one CRO, maybe you don't have executive sponsorship, or maybe you do, but not everyone is bought in. Yeah, it can be frustrating. So if you're just a guy that everyone looks to as this person's helpful, this person's always willing to help, validate, get me data, do this, they'd be more inclined to repay the favor with a test. And then when you run that test and it wins and you makes them look
Of
good,
course. Yeah.
that helps get people interested in experimentation. That's a Trojan horse. And I think that's where, especially when we think about like growing the experimentation program, if you're building it from scratch or you're building it from like 1 to 5 tests and you're trying to scale, shit like that
Right.
helps.
So you need buy-in and you need trust. Um, and uh, but yeah, you mentioned frustration, and it's definitely a lot to have on your plate if you're one man, if you're carrying all of the processes on your back. So speaking of frustration, because it may come from all sorts of places where you didn't expect. You can run into bugs or pushbacks or delays or whatever, hindrances. So how do you deal with frustration in terms of your everyday work when things like that happen? How do you keep on track and, you know, keep this educating perspective around your stakeholders or leadership, and how do you reconcile these things?
How do I deal with frustration in the work with CRO? I go to the gym a lot. That is that is the easy answer. A more practical answer is
In the midst of it.
it's a tough one because I think it's very personality driven. And I think that's where politics is so important that there's a lot of like picking up on social cues and understanding people and getting to know them better that helps. Because many people who are anti CRO, like many, just don't know what it is, right? They see this best practice shit list. They see, oh, we ran a button color test for this one company and it lifted conversion rate by 7,000%. And they're like, that's fing stupid. Of course that didn't happen. And yeah, maybe one person it did it, but people see this and they're like, yeah, of course this is stupid. Like I don't believe any of this. So there is that pervasive attitude. People read this and you might be at an uphill battle fighting it to be like, is this really something that's worthwhile doing? That's like maybe personality one. They don't understand it. It's not any type of maliciousness. They just don't understand it.
Yeah,
So if you're frustrated because you're like, I'm having trouble communicating with them, yeah, that's a challenge, but understand that's person one. Another personality type might be someone who's like, I know exactly what it is. And they might actually know what it is. And they're like, but I have an MBA. I am smarter than you. I read a book one time on UX design. Therefore, I know all the things. And that's a different personality type. And I think getting to understand what is their adversity, because most of the time it's not malicious. It's not anything against you. It's they just don't understand it. They have their own incentives. One of the things that really was eye opening for me is working with product owners in what's called a fast paced environment, which is like low key toxic. Anytime you hear a fast paced environment, like red flag. Anytime you hear it, red flag, red
yeah,
flag.
you have one.
I went on Amazon and bought that just for that reason. Um, when you're in a fast paced environment and like when you're working in that type of thing, sometimes you literally are getting this top down push to say, we have to ship quickly. These are the deadlines. And sometimes the product owner's like, I really want to test this so bad, but I have to just ship it. Like, I'm sorry. I care very much about what you want to do. I want to validate it. We are on the same team. I can't do it. Sorry. So sometimes that's a unifying moment for you and that product owner to be like, okay, well, maybe we can't test this right now, but let's figure out the testing strategy from here. And that's where it's like, just be helpful. Be that resource to help them. Because if instead all you're doing is yelling at them for, like, oh, it sucks, it's doing terrible, and then they roll it out to 100% because they got pressure from above and it totally tanks the site, and you're the asshole in the corner, like, I told you we should have tested it. Like, they're not going to be your friend. They're going to hate, they're going to be like, well, you. You're also an asshole. So, like, just be helpful. Just try and understand the personality traits because that is helpful in getting buy in. You might be objectively right in how you're talking about CRO, but being objectively right doesn't mean you're actually going to get
Yeah,
the buy.
that's right. That's right. I think that what helps is knowing that all of those things that you are trying to implement or test on a website, let's say one of the biggest conversion factors like addressing trust or um, removing friction. I think you should also do that when it comes to people above you, leadership, or your product owners.
Hmm.
So you also have to instill trust in them. You have to tell them why they should trust you. You have to know how to talk to them. Like you said, there are different user personas. You need to figure out. You need to do some sort of research to figure out who you're talking to, and yeah, and then just use it in the midst of it. Yeah.
So we circle back to the beginning of the conversation where I optimize everything. That this is a meta conversation around optimizing for getting buy-in into optimization, right? It's testing out different, doing your research on the user persona for the person that be buy-in. 100%. Yeah, I think getting to like versus if you just say the right things, I know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna roll this out to the site.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell this to the stakeholder. Yeah, you might be right, but that doesn't mean it's gonna work. Humans are weird.
Yep. Yep.
Psychology.
Yep. They're not rational beings. They're rationalizing beings who tend to.
Oh, I love that. Romeo, clip this.
Was just in this great book that I read. It's called "I'm Afraid Debbie from Marketing Has Left for the Day," and it talks about changing human behavior. And it says that so basically you do your thing and then you rationalize it, and then after that you think that you were a rational human being, even though you made an emotional decision and then rationalize it. So,
Yeah.
but
I think that's it. The crux of all this is like most, for the most part, everyone has some rational form of like coming to the conversation here. As much as you might be like, this guy's kind of being an asshole for not approving my test idea or not running the test or not doing this, there is, for the most part, probably a reason that they're doing it. And it might be a bad reason. It might be the I'm smarter than you, I have a degree reason. I'd say that's a bad reason. But it might be the other one. Like, I want to test it. We're on the same team here. I can't because it's above me. And that sucks.
yes, and also when they do have an idea, maybe they just know their website, maybe they just did their research, they really want their website to succeed. So of course, I mean, we also need to trust them as optimizers. So there has to be a
Yeah.
sort of partnership.
Well, you also think about like CEOs when you work with folks who maybe you consider traditional hippos, highest paid person's opinion. This is their like blood, sweat, and tears going into the site, right? This is their baby. So if you're just like a lowly junior analyst coming to the site and be like, the research tells you to do this, I'm just going to keep on using this Mickey Mouse voice. The research tells you to do this. You got to do blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay, whatever. This is my site. This is my company. This is my baby. You didn't spend all, a mortgage in your life savings investing in this company, which maybe it's not logical, but if you know that's in a they're coming from that kind of emotional state, you partner with them and be like, bro, I get it. I want to make sure this like works for you too. I want to give you the data to help grow your business because this is your baby. And like CRO has a tendency to prove people wrong, and people don't like being proven wrong.
Of course. Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but you have to approach it as like, no, 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 I'm doing this to make you look good. I'm trying to help you. And I think that's where I keep on going back to like ultimately the CRO's job and mentality, I think, should be let me help you.
Of course.
And if it's a test to validate, I'd love to help you. If it's quick, give you a quick data pull, it's not my job. I'll quickly help you. That's fine. I'll do that for you.
Right. But also everybody should strive for objectivity, but that is so hard. That is the hard part of it. But
Yeah.
speaking of again, we are still at the topic of client management. I'd like to know, because one time you mentioned that you don't like the term CRO to talk about experimentation on the whole, because CRO focuses only on optimizing conversion rate. But at the end of the day, we are testing to learn something. So it's more about experimentation. So we're still spinning around here, but how do you approach this? So getting the clients or working in this culture to actually move from testing to experimentation, where you don't just work in a feature factory where quantity is the most important thing. You also want to go back to a test, retest it if you want to make sure it wasn't a false negative. You want to dig deeper. So what are your tools to do this, in terms of course mental models, or just basic hard working tool. So how do you do this?
That's a tough question because the short answer is it depends. The longer answer with some amount of nuance to not totally cop out of answering this question is like I'd say it's probably focusing on process. And I think it's around the education of process around if you all you're doing is validation of existing things that are built out, to be honest, you're in a better spot than many. And I'd say good for you for actually taking the opportunity to validate something. You'd be surprised at many companies that don't validate. They're just feature shipping factories that literally don't even validate. So, if you are testing something and you have that capability, being able to expand that to help on the test to learn mechanism is going to be easier than if you have no amount of validation in any way. And the same with the other side that if you're perpetually testing to learn, but you're not incorporating experimentation into also validation of like site updates and dev releases, things like that, product and everything. It can be it's a Swiss Army knife. I don't want to actually I don't want to say Swiss Army knife because most Swiss Army knife tools suck. Like the stupid screwdriver doesn't fit on anything. The knife's dull as shit. It's like it's like a more upgraded version of the Swiss Army knife where it can actually
Optimize it.
do quite a lot. Yeah. Um but I keep on going back to like process and education. On the process side, and I guess teaching about process, using research to keep a cycle of like research, ideate, hypothesize, test, iterate, and like keep it going over and over and over again. I think that's the most important part of what was your original question? Like
Moving,
scale, not scaling.
yeah,
What was it?
moving from optimizing only for conversion into actually experimenting for knowledge.
Yeah. So growing from test to win into test to learn, I think one does also require pretty intimate collaboration with UX that the tests that you run generate insights and research generates insights and then gives you test ideas. So I guess part one is have UX, two, collaborate pretty closely with UX. So those things help bridge the gap from test to win purely into test to learn. Test to win to me is pretty synonymous with just spaghetti testing, where try a bunch of shit, see what works, and hopefully it wins. And if it doesn't win, we'll try the next thing and hope that wins. Versus learning fosters that let's try and see what happens and then exploring the why. Because digging deeper into trying to understand the why will ultimately get you towards much more winning than simply just
Of course.
try shit, see
Yes,
what
yes.
happens.
It seems that CRO is looked upon as it is a magic wand that just keeps, improving conversions infinitely. But at some
Yeah.
point, you really have to actually start digging deeper to actually know who you're talking to at what point of time, and what your users like, what they don't like, and so on.
Yeah. I would say CRO should be a process. CRO shouldn't be a like what's the word? Like focus on it being a process. Focus on the process. If CRO is a list of things to do, then you're akin to this best practice nonsense. And yeah, you might win sometimes, but it's not a sustainable process versus the process is sustainable. The process will work. The scientific method does work, which is why science use it. Scientists use it because it
It makes
works.
sense.
And it's like explain biology. Well, actually, that's a bad example. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, and of course, it you have to keep translating that to everybody around you. So it's a process. Let's keep testing to learn, and so on. So um,
Yeah.
let's not.
And I think that's important to like test too. So when we say, hey, if someone comes to you with an idea, what I generally do is take two steps back and say, what's the problem you're trying to solve here? Because many times they're like, cool idea, I want to try it. Cool idea, I want to try it. But take a step back and be like, what do you what's the problem here? Because most of the time they don't have a problem statement. They're just like, I don't know, it looks fucking cool, let's try it. And in my prior framework, I very rarely prioritize tests or run tests that are backed in no data. And it's like, hey, cool thing, let's try that. But if you take a step back and then they say, oh, I like it because when I looked in the data, I saw I don't know, like super engagement with this part of the page, and this other company does a really cool way of that thing. So because this gets so much engagement, I want to try it. And they're like, oh great, you bridged the gap from problem statement into hypo into solution, so now let's bump it up. That's a great idea. And it gets them thinking about that CRO versus and that process. Otherwise it's just, again, back to the point,
Yeah.
try it, see what
Yeah.
happens.
No, I like this approach. It's optimistic. Of course, you have to first, go through trial and error, and then you get more mature, and then of course that translates into deeper stuff. I appreciate that. But tell me, what was the last aha moment that you had, um, in terms of whatever part of the process? So, what was something that made you realize you were not exactly on the right track?
Okay, well, this is some humble cake that I've eaten. I have dogged a lot on copy testing in my career. Like, probably, I don't want to say recently. I feel like in the past 3 or 4 years, I've been very good about not doing this. But early in my career, I used to just be like, who the fuck wants to test copy? Oh, yeah, it says free trial versus start a demo. So much better. It's a different voice, apparently. Like that shit. Like I used to be so like copy testing does not matter. And two things totally opened my eyes. One, when I was working at Spiro, using Winter to copy test totally opened my eyes of like, oh, it words matter. It absolutely does matter. And my latest episode, I'm just this is a great plug, another plug, super organic. Latest episode of From A to B, I talked to Eden about copywriting, and she's the absolute homie. She has so many great words about copy. I ran some homepage copy tests, and they have totally stunned me with how much of an impact they can have. And I think my to give myself credit, I think some of the things I was seeing as copy testing were bad copy tests. Like
Of course.
to that point, it was let's try random words cuz why not? But when it's actually backed in research of users coming to your site and your CTA says like get started, and you run a copy test on users and you're like, "Hey, what do you expect to happen?" You click get started, and it's like no one has a, what's the word, like an answer. No, yeah, they're not totally aligned. Everyone has a different answer. Then you're like, all right, this is unclear, let's try being more clear. And then you try different words that, and then you copy test that and you say, yeah, that's more alignment, and then you run the A/B test and then you see it wins. So TLDR, bad copy tests are still bad copy tests. But when they're backed in research and when you're actually solving for problems, especially problems that users have on like lack of clarity or a bunch of mumbo jumbo bargain, one of the things that was pretty funny, actually, I'm going to turn this around and ask you a question
Okay.
because it's a fun exercise.
Okay.
If I told you this headline on a website for a B2B company,
Okay.
name the product category, okay?
Okay.
The future is here.
That was in the podcast. I would say it's some sort of cybersecurity or cloud storage or something to do with technology.
Well, I technology is probably correct, but for you, like, I could even sense reading this with you. You're like, I can't go any more specific than that because I have no idea.
I know where you're getting it. Yes, yeah, yeah. It's not specific. It's not telling you anything. It's just fluff. You don't know what to do with it. So tell me where to go. Tell me what to do next. I don't want to, read stuff on your website that doesn't tell me anything. I know what you mean.
Exactly. So I think part of it is like, yeah, well, perhaps you have super optimized copy on your site, and if you've tested it and things are clear, then perhaps copy testing isn't the way. But I will say there's a lot of bad copy, and I think spicy take with more generative AI coming out, I've seen copy noticeably get shittier, and it is more of a and more buzzworthier. Um, like it's all more reason that we need more actual human testing, and copy is going to be a differentiator in the future. Words continue to matter and will continue to matter. I'm sorry,
I agree.
words do matter and will continue to matter. So my aha moment is copy matters, folks.
This has been so great, and it's giving me a lot of hope, and it was a very um, what's the word? I keep wanting to say optimizing, but I actually mean positive, or optimistic. That's the word. Uh, it was an optimistic talk. So thank you so much for joining, and thank you.
Thank you for having me, and you did a great job for your first interview. Looking forward to listening to many more
I hope
interviews that you give
those will
for
come. So
experimentation.
yeah, Shiva, this has been great, and enjoy your day, and I'll talk to you soon.
This is Roma Santiago from Experimentation. Every week we share interviews with and conference sessions by our favorite conversion rate optimizers from around the world. So if you like this video, smash that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us a bunch.
Hey, Romeo, hope you're having fun editing out this portion as you're walking through this. Keep going. We appreciate you. You're doing great.